Hello, and welcome back to the William Gomes podcast. I am William Gomes, and I'm grateful to have you here. This series is called Reading Seminar 1 and 2, Lacan's Return to Freud Revisited. In the previous episode, we revisited beyond the pleasure principle and saw why Sigmund Freud's discovery of repetition forces psychoanalysis to abandon models of psychic life based on equilibrium, adaptation, or ego mastery. Repetition, we saw, exits pleasure, insight, and intention. In this episode, we deepen that problem. If repetition is not governed by the pleasure principle, and if it persists beyond conscious intention, then how should psychoanalysis understand it? For Jacques Lacan, the answer lies in structure. Repetition is not accidental. It is not the mechanical recurrence of past events, nor is it simply a habit formed through learning. Repetition follows a logic, even when that logic is opaque to the subject. Lacan names this logic automatism. At first hearing, the word automatism can sound reductive, as though Lacan were turning the subject into a machine. That is not his intention. Automatism does not mean behavior without meaning. It means repetition without mastery. Automatism names the fact that something in the subject repeats independently of conscious choice. The subject does not decide to repeat. Repetition happens through them. This is why repetition cannot be corrected through willpower, education, or insight. The ego may understand the pattern perfectly and still be unable to stop it. This persistence reveals something crucial. Repetition is not organized at the level of the ego, it is organized at the level of a structure. Structure here does not mean a rigid system imposed from outside. It refers to the way elements are related to one another in a network that precedes the subject's conscious intentions. In seminars I and II, Lacan began to formalize this idea by insisting that repetition is tied to the structure of speech. Repetition appears in what is said, how it is said, and what cannot be said. Certain signifiers return, certain formulations recur, certain impasses are circled again and again. These repetitions are not random. They follow a path laid down by the subject's relation to language. This is why Lacan insists that repetition must be listened to rather than interpreted away. When the analyst hears repetition as a stubbornness, resistance, or pathology, they miss its structural function. Repetition is not what blocks analysis, it is what analysis works with. This is also why Lacan rejects behavioral explanations of repetition. Behavioral models treat repetition as habit. Habits, on this view, can be modified through reinforcement, correction, or substitution. But analytic repetition persists even when the subject actively wants it to stop. The difference is decisive. Habit belongs to behavior. Repetition belongs to the subject's structure. Similarly, psychological explanations often treat repetition as unresolved conflict that can be resolved through insight. But as we have already seen, insight does not abolish repetition. The persistence of repetition after insight demonstrates that repetition is not a cognitive problem. Lacan, therefore, treats repetition as an effect of the symbolic organization of the subject. This does not yet mean that Lacan has fully articulated what he will later call the symbolic order, but the groundwork is already present. Repetition shows that the subject is caught in sequences that are not of their own making. Speech returns to certain points. Narratives loop back to the same impasses, meaning circulates without closure. This circulation is what Lacan calls automatism. Automatism does not eliminate subjectivity. On the contrary, it reveals the subject's dependence on structures that precede and exceed them. The subject is not the author of repetition. The subject is articulated by it. This insight has important clinical consequences. If repetition is structural, then analytic technique must not aim to interrupt repetition directly. Attempts to stop repetition by reassurance or advice often strengthen it. Instead, analysis allows repetition to unfold within the analytic situation. This does not mean endless repetition without intervention. It means listening for how repetition is organized. For example, when the same complaint returns session after session, the question is not why the subject cannot move on. The question is what position this repetition sustains in speech. When the same disappointment recurs in different relationships, the question is not how to choose better partners. The question is how the subject is positioned in relation to desire and demand. By listening to repetition structurally, analysis avoids moralizing it or treating it as failure. This also clarifies why repetition is so closely linked to transference. Repetition does not remain outside the analytic situation, it enters it. The same expectations, frustrations, and demands that structure the subject's life appear in relation to the analyst. This is not a complication, it is the condition of analytic work. The analytic situation becomes the place where repetition can be encountered as such. This encounter is not immediate. It unfolds over time through speech, silence, and interpretation. And crucially, it cannot be forced. Automatism does not yield to pressure. It yields only when its structure is allowed to articulate itself. This brings us to an important transitional point in the series. By formalizing repetition as automatism and structure, Lacan prepares the introduction of a register that will allow him to articulate this structure more precisely. That register is the symbolic. In the next episode, we will examine the emergence of the symbolic order and see how it allows Lacan to explain repetition, subject formation, and the limits of ego psychology in a more systematic way. Thank you for listening. This is the William Gomes podcast. Take care of yourself, stay curious, and if you found this episode helpful, you're very welcome to follow, share, leave a comment, or a rating. I'll speak with you again soon.